evening. Thanks for tuning in. You're watching the Urban Debate with me, Avni Raja. Now, the big Mehengai debate continues to echo in Parliament. Yesterday in the Lok Sabha and today in the Rajya Sabha, various issues were raised by the opposition, especially with regard to GST being imposed on hospital rooms, crematoriums. The Finance Minister has given a point-by-point rebuttal on several of the questions posed by the opposition. However, it is the middle class, the common man, who has been caught up amid all of this politics. But data also shows, CMIE today released unemployment data, and that shows that the unemployment rate in July has fallen to 6.8%, which is the lowest level in the last 6 months amid rising agriculture activities during the monsoon. In fact, the unemployment rate dropped to 6.8% in July from 7.8% in June. So tonight, what we are going to try and do is keep politics aside and understand where exactly does our economy stand. All the data and the statistics that we're getting as far as the indicators of the economy are concerned, do they match up to the anecdotal data, to data or to experiences and what people and citizens have to say, whether inflation is really just at 7% or is there a lot more that goes into it, and budgets are seeing a lot of inflation as well. But before I go across to our guests, let's take a look at some of the reactions.
2/3 of the cess, of the total taxes, cess and surcharge is collected by the centre. So stop this argument of 5 rupiya ye, 6 rupiya ye. 2/3 is collected. Sir, that's the first response. And what is the number? 20. Second number, sir, we all know. Retail inflation. Retail inflation, 6 we say, RBI says 6 is fair, okay. Last 2 quarters, retail inflation has been 7. Trouble, retail inflation. Berojgari. Unemployment. 29% of youth in India do not have jobs. 29. 1 out of 3 do not have jobs.
प्रधानमंत्री जी मनमोहन सिंह जी थे, महंगाई के लिए डॉलर की कीमत और रुपये को साथ गिनते हुए मोदी जी ने कहा था कि प्रधानमंत्री जी की उम्र के साथ ये रुपया कंपटीशन कर रहा है। अरे वो तो प्रधानमंत्री जी अच्छे थे कि उन्होंने अपनी उम्र से आगे कभी नहीं जाने दिया। मोदी जी की 2 बर्थ डेट है और दोनों बर्थ डेट की उम्र से आगे आज रुपये की कीमत चली गई है। ये हकीकत है। वो कहते थे रुपया गिरता है तो समझ लो प्रधानमंत्री गिर रहे हैं, उसकी इज्जत गिर रही है। वो कहते थे रुपया गिरता है तो समझ लो दिल्ली की सरकार की इज्जत गिर रही है। मैं आज कहता हूं कि आपने तो रिकॉर्ड ब्रेक कर दिया।
And you said every year you will give 2 crores of employment to the youth, but now I said, as said in the beginning, the unemployment has soared high. And next comes the demonetization policy, the highly flawed demonetization policy which was imposed upon the people all of a sudden, which devastated the MSM sector, the informal economy and the whole economy of this country. The GST has increased the basic prices, and Derek was quoting about a couple, a man and a woman getting up in the morning, getting ready to go to office, going out, what are all the expenses. Let me tell you one more thing, my dear friend. A person dies, he is no more. He is taken to the crematorium, there he has to pay 18%.
हम किसानों के मेले में जाकर क्या कहते हैं? किसानों के मेले में हम जाकर कहते हैं कि लाभकारी मूल्य किसान को मिलना चाहिए, उसके दाम बढ़ने चाहिए। करेक्ट है। जो प्रोड्यूस करता है उसको अधिकार का मिलना चाहिए। फिर हम दूसरी तरफ कहते हैं कि महंगाई बढ़ी है तो नहीं, वो सस्ता चाहिए, मार्केट में सस्ती चाहिए। और अनाज में आपको पता है कि नहीं, मैं बता रहा हूं ना, सरकार 20 रुपए यानी सभी खर्चा मिलके 30 रुपए में 1 किलो चावल लेती है, तैयार होता है, और 30 रुपए का चावल राज्यों को 3 रुपए में देती है। और 2 साल फ्री में दिया था 80 करोड़ लोगों को पूरा राशन, दुनिया में एक भी ऐसा देश नहीं था। अब इसको खर्चा आएगा कि नहीं? 2,71,000 करोड़ रुपए खर्चा आया, वो कहां से लाएंगे? तो इनकी एक मांग होती है कि रोल बैक टैक्सेस, यानी एक तरफ उत्पादों को कीमत दो, दूसरा टैक्स मत लगाओ और लोगों को सस्ता दो। हम कुछ तो हमारे से ऑनेस्ट होना चाहिए खुद से कि हम जो बोल रहे हैं वो कॉन्टेक्स्ट में बोलना चाहिए, कंपैरिजन में बोलना चाहिए।
Let me welcome our guests who are joining us on the show tonight. Subhash Chandra Garg, former Finance Secretary of India. Jagdish Shettigar, Senior Economist, is with us as well. Dr. Santosh Mehrotra, Senior Economist, also joining us. And Vijay Sardana will also join us in just a bit. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us here on the broadcast. Let me start with you, Mr. Subhash Chandra Garg, and ask you one simple question. We've heard a lot that's been spoken in Parliament, both in the Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, about what's happening and, the measures that have been taken, opposition raising a lot of questions. But the reason as to why this extent of inflation is happening, that has not been addressed enough by the finance minister.
So, the inflation, which is the increase in prices of goods and services, relative to what it was last year or last month, takes place basically because there is smaller supply compared to what the demand is, and then people pay higher prices for it. So the fundamental reason why the inflation will take place is the mismatch between the supply and demand. That is not completely in control of the politicians. That's they don't determine. They don't produce food. They don't produce industrial goods. They don't import what comes from the global supply chains, and therefore, sort of putting the blame entirely on the political doorsteps is perhaps not correct. We must, for understanding things, go into the real reasons for the supply. Now, let us say the food, fuel, and the industrial goods and services, which are mainly the things which are consumed. Now, fuel, for the time being, for last couple of months, is on fire. Except last few weeks, there's been some slight reduction. But the fuel supplies, whether it's coal, gas, oil, all of them, and on which we are so much dependent on import, had gone up. And therefore, if that price goes up, and also the dollar appreciates and rupee depreciates, the Indian prices of fuel has to go up. The government can, for the time being, hold on the effect, which it is trying to do by not raising the fuel prices enough. But at the same time, the government, which could have reduced the taxes, has not reduced that much as it could have done. So the fuel is because of that. Food, which is another measure, and 45% of our consumer price index is made up of the food items. Now, the global situation also again created mismatch for wheat. We also had a loss of wheat production because of the heat wave in February and March. And now what we are hearing is that because the monsoonal problem, there might be a problem in the rice supply in the incoming season, etc. So there are major reasons why the prices will go up, and we need to take up appropriate measures for them rather than just blaming each other.
Yes, absolutely. And that's exactly what the point of this debate today is, to keep politics aside and try and understand the situation of where we are. And to that effect, Jagdish Shettigar, do you believe that enough has been done to try and address this issue from the government's end? We, of course, know that the RBI has already done quite a bit, as much as it can possibly do. The RBI has taken steps, but has enough been done, especially for the middle class who are facing the brunt of it?
As far as the RBI is concerned, no doubt they have been focusing on containing the inflation. But RBI becomes effective only if the inflation is due to the rise in the demand. The demand, that is what we call the demand pull inflation. But the type of the inflation which we have been experiencing is the cost push inflation. That is both on account of external factor as well as the internal factor. As Mr. Garg has pointed out, there has been supply disruptions. One, of course, because of the pent-up demand, because for almost 2 years, there was a demand constraint and the people are not coming to the market in a normal rate. But suddenly, with the economy picking up, the demand also started going up, but proportionately the supply has not been increasing. And as far as the external factors are concerned, there are many, the development. The one, of course, the rupee is getting the depreciating, and with that, our import of crucial items, whether it's a crude oil or the other commodity, landed price has been increasing, apart from the fact that even in the international market, there has been rise in the price, both in the crude oil and other commodities. And in addition to that, there are other external development. One, of course, to contain the inflation within the country, the Federal Reserve has been raising the federal rate. Now, whenever the federal rate goes up, the FIIs withdraw their money from the India. And when they withdraw, that leads to the depreciation of the rupee. That is a further what we call the blow on the economy. Whenever the rupee gets depreciated, import cost goes up. So both, and then of course the other disruption, whether it is a Russian-Ukraine war or some other external constraint, all this ultimately, because today we are a part of the globalization, whatever happens at the global level, that will impact, though ours is not an export-led growth, but still we get impacted at least as far as about 16% of the GDP. So both from the point of, the external factor as well as the demand, the internal factors have been affecting. And we cannot blame, whoever have been in the government. This is the situation we would have faced and all. But my worry is not the present one. In the immediate future, maybe in the 2022 and or 23 and also 24, because the prediction is that there is likely to be slowdown in the international level, and especially the major markets India depends on for our exports, whether it is the US or the Eurozone or the Middle East, and all these countries are expected to perform badly in the next couple of years. So that is the real worrying factor actually. And in order to contain the inflation, actually, I don't think that the RBI can do much actually. On the other hand, they will be harming what they call the production, because we had examined the data and we had seen that except a few years, RBI never been effective in containing the inflation, because as I said, only in the case of the demand pull inflation, the monetary policy becomes the effective.
Yes, absolutely. And that's a very important point here, when the inflation isn't led, it's not demand pull inflation. But I'll get to that in a bit. Going to Professor Mehrotra here, when we talk about inflation at 6% or 7% as it is currently, that is a CPI inflation, it's really not reflective of the actual inflationary pressure that the common man is facing, because you have the rupee devaluation which gets added to that pressure. Your savings are literally getting wiped out because your fixed deposit interest that you get is still lower than the inflation amount. So all in all, the inflationary pressure that a common man faces today is much higher than that 7% number.
You're right. And obviously, the economy has been in crisis even before COVID, and it has gone further into crisis since COVID because of the poor management of COVID and the kind of stimulus that was put in place, which I will speak about in a minute. And that's the reason why the people are suffering, because of the joint effects of high unemployment and rising unemployment and inflation on top of that. Now, the speakers before me have pointed out a number of factors, and many of them are international. Now, given that many of the international factors are not within the government of India's control, what should the government be doing? I think the other panelists have rightly pointed out the RBI's role is limited. Why? Because interest rates are the most important instrument in its hand. And interest rates have precious little impact on about 55% of the weight of the products which are part of the CPI. What do I mean by that? Food is about 45, 46%. And interest rates barely impact food at all. Fuel is imported, a very significant part of it. Interest rates don't impact that. So if the only actions that the RBI can take in respect of interest rates impacts core inflation, which is the remaining 45%, then clearly RBI is not the main actor, although it may think that it is. Who's the main actor then? Yes, the RBI is an actor in respect of the exchange rate, but there are limits to what the RBI has been able to do, and I can come back to that later. The more important point here is, which has so far not been pointed out, are two things. One, in the stimulus that was put in place in FY21, that means from April or May of 2020, most of you don't perhaps recognize that the size of our credit stimulus and the size of our liquidity stimulus was something like 6.9% of GDP when the emerging market economies put in place a monetary policy that means liquidity and credit stimulus no more than 1.9% of GDP. So excess liquidity was created by the RBI. So RBI has been making mistakes from then, and this has been feeding into sustained inflation. This is the first point I wanted to make. The second point is that clearly the finance ministry has control. What does it have control over? It has control over prices that you and I pay for diesel, which is a great input into a whole series of products and distribution costs for everyone, for farmers, for products and services in the non-farm sector. Who's been raising taxes and cesses on petrol and diesel and gas? We know who. At a time when demand has collapsed, right? So it's not that demand is exceeding supply. When demand has collapsed, per capita consumption is lower today, even after a recovery than it was in 1920. That means the problem is not so much demand. The problem is because that increase in demand that took place after, suppressed demand, that happened till in the late 21, and that is it. Now, the inflation is being driven by government policy, by taxes and by cesses, which is entirely in the hands of the government. If, and I'm finishing, if the government knows that aggregate demand is low in the economy, then what would you be expecting the government to do? What you would expect the government to do is what was being done post-global economic crisis of 2008-9, which is you cut taxes. No, you have increased taxes and indirect taxes. What you've done instead, because you lost out on corporate tax revenue of about 1.45 lakh crores, as well as personal income taxes, you push people above the threshold. You've already eliminated wealth tax in 2015. You desperately need money, especially when expenditures are going up due to COVID. So what do? You raise taxes, indirect taxes on inputs, the biggest input being fuel. Is this the opposite of macroeconomics 101 or not? I would like to ask those who at least understand some economics in the government of India.
Yes, fair enough. Extremely valid points that you've raised there, Professor Mehrotra. Vijay Sardana, if you would like to come in here, do you also believe that it is a time that the government needs to do some serious tax cuts to sort of help the situation right now?
First of all, good evening to all of you, including your viewers. See, my take is slightly different here. First of all, two things we have to keep in mind. One is, what is the source of inflation? Is this the tax rates? If that is the case, then how much? Number one. Number two, is this the, as earlier speaker also mentioned, whether this inflation is due to the demand side problem or supply side problem? Unless we diagnose it properly, any argument or any solution is not going to give any answer to this. Let me give you a live example. Everybody is talking about food inflation. Now, very specifically, case to case, let us understand the cause and then we debate the answer. Today, in Nasik, the onion price is 10 rupees a kg. In Delhi wholesale market, onion price is 13 to 14 rupees a kg. Onion in your neighborhood shop ranges anything from 25 to 45 rupees a kg. What interest will do here? What government has to do here? That is what we have to think seriously. 10 rupees onion available to consumer anything from 25 to 45, depending on where you are located. Now there are two ways to look at it, because I'm talking of common man's inflation. The onion is one example because everybody understands and everybody debates about basic fundamental issues like onions. Now challenge is a twofold. Should we leave it to the market forces the way it is today? If yes, then we have to go with market forces because government has no role to decide the prices of onions. Second option, like it happens in Dubai and in many other countries where there is a food deficiency, the government controls the prices of essential commodities. For example, onion. In Dubai, if you are selling onion at 20 rupees a kg or 30 rupees a kg, if you want to increase the price to 35 or 40, you have to take a permission from the government. Now, as a policy maker, as a country, as citizens, we have to seriously think whether we want a free economy or we want controlled economy. Because answer is there. You can solve the problem. But what are the implications? One way of looking at it, number one. Number two, when it comes to corporate taxes, sometimes we feel that we are isolated and we are the only country in the world. On one side, we demand that employment in this country should go up, investment in this country should go up, and when you approach the investors, investor has a very simple answer. There are 160 countries where I can go and invest. Why I should come to India? Give me one reason. And then you say we are this, we are that, and everything is fine. End of the day, the investor says, but your tax rate is so high, you're higher than the average part of the world or in a better markets in the world. Sorry, then maybe Vietnam is better, maybe China is better, maybe Japan is better, maybe Thailand is better. Why I should not go there and manufacture there and export to India instead of make in India? Then when you have to look at the parity around the world, you have to reduce your corporate taxes so that you attract investments. You have to attract investments for two simple reasons. One, you have to create employment in this country. If you don't want employment, then it's fine. We don't care. Then the trading continues. We are not interested in manufacturing. Then if you go for manufacturing, you have to come into an attractive zone so that investors look at you for investments. We are not in isolation. We can talk about X government or Y government or X PM or Y PM. Investor is nothing to do with that. As an investor, I purely look at balance sheet, not at the political affiliation. We have to be very clear. Even within India, when I go for investment in any state, my first criteria is what are the problems in a given state. Why I do not invest in Punjab and I invest in Haryana? Because simple point is mandi taxes. How many companies are going to Punjab to invest in wheat, which is the major producer of wheat? No one is going for a simple reason because mandi tax is very high. Now you say this is BJP government or X government or Y government. That is not a criteria for investor. He only looks at balance sheet and performance and the corruption and ease of doing business. Simple. So when within India we have a different approaches towards investments in the states, don't you think that international investor will compare between countries? So my way of looking at it is when it comes to inflation, we have to be very clear whether it is a homegrown inflation, whether it is a supply side inflation, whether it is a demand side. And when it is not a demand side, then there is no fun in raising interest rate, because in fact, it is counterproductive because you are increasing the supply side investments. You are making more investment which is required in supply side. You want to make it more expensive. People will not invest. So I think very often I'm telling RBI is taking a wrong stand by increasing interest rate, because your problem is on supply side. You have to encourage investment in supplies, infrastructure, warehousing, logistics. But by increasing interest rate, you are discouraging that. And on the demand side, it will remain constant because everybody has to eat the food. So I don't think that the recipe which is used right now by RBI is the answer to the problem.
Right. Subhash Chandra Garg, I would like you to come in on that point here, because this, of course, has been a big, debate as to whether raising rates so rapidly is, how much is that really going to help in this inflationary scenario that we are facing currently?
So this is, I think, correct to say that if there is no demand side push for the inflation, it's not a monetary phenomenon. At that time, raising the interest rates don't really serve the purpose of controlling inflation. So to that extent, I think this is fine. But the interest rates have another function, which is very important. The foreign investment has been spoken here. The foreign investment will always come, whether in the FDI side or even on the portfolio investment side, only if the relative interest rates they earn here vis-a-vis what they earn by investing in US or elsewhere, they make a little bit more money here. Otherwise, they will not come. So if the interest rate remains low here in the economy, and so just to give you a comparison, so dollar today is fetching about 3% rate of interest in US for a 10-year government bond. If it gets about 7% here and the inflation is about 6 to 7%, there is no point that the foreign investors will bring the portfolio investments here. And when the capital side, unfortunately, our situation is tough. We are very much in deficit on the trade side. This year, we'll probably have about $250 billion of deficit on the trade account. And services, we have some surplus. Even on current account, we'll probably have $100 billion of deficit. Now, if that deficit is not covered by the capital flows, our exchange rate will depreciate heavily. And therefore, if you don't raise interest rates, you will not be able to get the external account correctly. So, which also is in a way external value of your money. So while the demand side is out of the equation and may not justify the raising of interest rate, but to get the capital account flows right, you have to do the interest rate increase. If you don't do it, then you would not get the capital flows, and your balance of payment will remain in problem, and exchange rate will depreciate. So I think we will need to understand in its all comprehensiveness, and then take a kind of call rather than saying that for X, if it doesn't work, we should not be raising the interest rate.
Fair enough on that point. In fact, Jagdish Shetty, I want to come to you on another point that the finance minister spoke about, was that there is no chance that India is going to slip into a recession. I just want to understand whether saying that there is 0% or there is no chance, is that a fair assumption to really make? How long can India be shielded from that if we see other countries slipping into recession, especially places like the US and Europe?
As I already mentioned, almost the entire world is going to perform badly in the next coming year, as per the recent IMF survey. And as far as India is concerned, major market destinations, whether it is the Eurozone or the US, Middle East, China, they are all expected to perform badly, that will definitely adversely affect us. Even in the 2008-9, when India got insulated, mainly because of the support from the rural sector, export-oriented units suffered. In fact, the thousands of diamond cutters committed suicide because of the diamond export got affected. So this is the situation, though I said that hardly 16% of our GDP depends on the outside market. So, but as far as the finance minister's statement is concerned, we have to wait and see. Now, if RBI continues to have the same approach, that is raising the interest rate in the name of controlling the inflation, as I said, that it will not be effective. But on the other hand, it will have the counter effect, especially when the industry started reviving. Now look at the data, whether it is the GST collections or even the credit dispersal. As a matter of fact, during the last few days, in fact, the call money rate is higher than the repo rate, which means that there has been a pressure on the banks to lend. And in the process, many of the banks are defaulting as far as the adherence in the reserve ratio is concerned. That compels them to borrow from some other banks with a surplus. And that resulted in the call money rate going up. But good thing is that indicates the demand for the credit, which was not there a few months back. Now, when the industry started reviving and the economy, I mean, there is a signal of the revival, whether you look at the GST collection or any data. At this point of time, RBI is having what you call the tight monetary policy approach will be counter for it. Now, if that continues, plus the international scenario, expected scenario, that may have the adverse effect on the Indian economy. So that is why we have to be alert, and whether it is RBI and even from the government side. The government also can, from the fiscal side, some measures can be initiated. Because many think that bringing the petroleum product into GST will affect the revenue collections of both center and the states. But it is a compromise it is a sort of compromise between the center and the states to bring states on the board for agreeing for the constitutional amendment. But I argue that though in the short run, center and the state's revenue collection may get affected, in the long run, it will have the positive effect because as per my calculation, estimation, even if you put petroleum product at the highest GST rate of 28%, still the petroleum prices in the Delhi should be at least the 30 rupees lower than that.
Right.
Now, when that comes, because the petrol affects the entire what they call the economic activities, so that will minimize the cost of production. Now, as far as the PSUs are concerned, when their cost of production coming down, leading to the higher profit, leading to higher dividend contribution to the government. And as far as the private sector is concerned, with their cost of production coming down, leading to the higher profit, will lead to the higher corporate tax to the government. So this is wrong to argue that if you bring GST into the petroleum product into the GST net, the revenue collections of the government will get affected. And because I feel that on the other hand, the government may be benefited both the center as well as the state revenue. And in the long run, of course, as one of the panelists pointed out about the problem in the food, and I think he has pointed about the onion or the orange. Now, as far as the agricultural products are concerned, unless we build up the agri infrastructure, whether it is a transportation system or the storage, because in the process of perishable product coming from the farmer to the ultimate consumer, more than 50% of the product get destroyed. Now, who will have to pay them? Ultimately, the consumer will pay. Now, in order to prevent that, both from the distribution side, transportation side, and as well as the storage side, we have to promote the infrastructure. So that is why the government wanted to bring in that farm laws. Unfortunately, government could not communicate to only a small section of the farmers, hardly 5 or the 6% of the farmers.
Fair enough. I'm afraid we're completely out of time, but I'd like to thank all of you for joining in and putting a lot of perspective into this entire issue here, which, let's face it, is not easy because the government is walking a very fine balance, whether it's the government, the RBI, trying to walk a very fine balance in trying to manage the situation, not hurt demand, control inflation. So all of those factors have to be looked at, but on the other side, there is the common man, the Aam Aadmi, who is facing a whole lot of inflationary pressures that is impacting the Aam Aadmi at all levels. But we'll continue to keep our focus on this subject going forward as well. For now, let's slip into a very quick break and come back with lots more.